The courtroom was already leaning toward a verdict before Clara Whitman even stood up. She could feel it in the air, the quiet confidence of people who believed they had already won. The polished wood benches, the soft hum of whispered conversations, the way every glance slid over her wrinkled navy dress and worn leather bag, silently ranking her worth. On the opposite side of the aisle sat the Crowells, straight-backed and smug, dressed in tailored suits that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and certainty. Patricia Crowell didn't bother hiding her disdain. She leaned toward her husband and spoke just loudly enough. "She really showed up like that? For a divorce hearing?" A few restrained chuckles followed. Clara kept her eyes forward. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, nails trimmed short because she couldn't afford another manicure. She hadn't slept the night before. Her phone still held 3 missed calls from the assisted living nurse. Her mother's medication schedule had been mixed up again. But none of that mattered here. In this room, none of her reasons mattered. Ethan Crowell didn't look at her once. He stared ahead with the detached patience of a man waiting for paperwork to be finalized, his arm resting comfortably on the table beside his lawyer. To him, this was a transaction, a cleanup, the final step before a better life officially began. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the Crowells were already performing. "She doesn't even have a steady job," Brooke Crowell said, flipping through her phone. "I mean, restoration consulting? That's not a career, that's a hobby." Everyone. "Ethan carried her for years," Patricia added. "We all know that." Clara swallowed hard. She had learned long ago that defending herself only fed them. Silence was safer. Silence didn't give them more ammunition. A court clerk called the room to order. Everyone stood as Judge Eleanor Briggs entered, her expression neutral, unreadable. As the proceedings began, the Crowells' lawyer moved quickly, confidently, outlining a narrative that painted Clara as a burden, financially dependent, emotionally fragile, and ultimately disposable. When Clara's turn came to speak, she stood slowly. Her legs trembled, but her voice didn't. "I'm not asking for spousal support," she said. The room shifted. Patricia Crowell smiled for the first time that morning. No one noticed the judge pause her pen mid-air. 5 years earlier, Clara Whitman had walked into her marriage believing that being quiet, capable, and loyal would be enough. She met Ethan Crowell on a rainy afternoon in Brooklyn, both of them sheltering inside a small coffee shop while waiting for the storm to pass. She was carrying a rolled set of sketches under her arm, restoration plans for a brownstone ceiling that had survived since the 1920 seconds. Ethan noticed them first. He asked questions, he listened. He said he admired women who worked with their hands and minds instead of chasing attention. At the time, that felt like respect. Clara never lied about who she was, she just didn't explain everything. She said she worked contract jobs, she said money came and went, she said family was complicated. Ethan nodded and told her that didn't matter. He said he liked her simplicity, her lack of baggage, her calm way of moving through the world. What he really liked was that she never made him feel small. Their early years were modest, a rented apartment in Jersey City, second-hand furniture, dinners cooked at home. Clara took pride in making things last, repairing chipped tables, restoring old frames, turning discarded objects into something dignified again. It was what she did best. She fixed things without anyone noticing. The Crowells noticed everything. Patricia Crowell had taken one look at Clara during their first family dinner and smiled thinly. "So what exactly do you do again?" she asked, as if Clara's answer might change if she repeated the question enough times. When Clara explained, Patricia nodded politely, then turned to her son. "That's creative. As long as you're happy, Ethan." It was never said outright, but Clara felt it immediately. She wasn't what they'd imagined for him. Not impressive enough. Not connected enough. Not useful enough. After the wedding, the comments sharpened. Patricia asked when Clara planned to find something more stable. Brooke joked about Clara's clothes, her car, her refusal to upgrade her phone. Leonard Crowell liked to lecture her about financial responsibility, even though she had never once asked them for help. Ethan started repeating their words without realizing it. "Maybe you should think about something with benefits," he said one night, scrolling on his laptop. "You could try corporate design," he suggested another time. "People expect a certain image," he added. Eventually, Clara adjusted. She always adjusted. She turned down longer contracts so she could manage the household. She rearranged her schedule to accommodate Ethan's work dinners. She handled logistics quietly, efficiently, without praise. When her mother's memory began slipping, Clara absorbed that responsibility too, driving hours after work, juggling appointments, hiding the exhaustion behind practiced calm. None of it counted. To the Crowells, Clara was invisible labor. To Ethan, she became background noise. Useful, replaceable, easy to overlook. The first time Clara sensed someone else, she didn't scream or accuse. She noticed the subtle shifts, the phone angled away, the sudden interest in cologne, the impatience when she asked simple questions. When she finally confronted Ethan, he didn't deny it, he minimized it. "You've changed," he said. "You're always tired. Always stressed. This just happened." What he didn't say was that the Crowells had already chosen a replacement. By the time divorce was mentioned, Clara had already lost more than a marriage. She had lost her standing, her safety, her voice in that family. Still, she walked into the courtroom believing one thing would remain intact: her dignity. She didn't know yet how hard they planned to take even that away. If Clara Whitman had known that kindness could be weaponized, she might have protected herself sooner. After the separation became public, the Crowell family shifted tactics. The open insults faded. In their place came something more dangerous: polite concern, strategic sympathy, and invitations that sounded like olive branches. Patricia Crowell called Clara one afternoon, her voice unusually gentle. "We don't want this to get ugly," she said. "You're still family, in a way." Clara almost believed her. They invited her to dinner to talk things through. The house looked the same: tasteful, expensive, intimidating. Clara noticed the details she always noticed: the new hardwood floors, the subtle upgrades, the framed photos arranged to tell a story of success and unity. She was not in any of them. Patricia served wine Clara couldn't pronounce and asked careful questions about her finances, her work, her plans. Leonard nodded thoughtfully, offering advice that sounded generous but landed heavy. Brooke smiled too much, chiming in with comments about how stressful court could be for women like Clara. "It's better to settle early," Brooke said. "Judges don't like emotional cases." Ethan barely spoke. When he did, it was to sound reasonable, calm, detached, as if the marriage had been a joint project that simply didn't work out. They talked about lawyers, about costs, about what Clara realistically deserved. No one raised their voice. No one insulted her directly. That was the point. By the end of the evening, Patricia slid a folder across the table. "Just review it," she said. "It'll save everyone time and stress." Clara didn't open it there. She took it home and read it slowly, carefully, the way she examined antique structures before touching them. The settlement offered no spousal support, no acknowledgement of non-financial contributions, a timeline that favored Ethan in every possible way. It was framed as mercy. The next morning, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from Madeline Ross. "I hope this isn't weird," it read. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know this must be hard for you." And 49. "They met by chance," Madeline said, "at a cafe near the courthouse." Madeline arrived dressed softly, neutrally, the kind of woman who didn't look like a threat. She spoke kindly of Ethan, but not too kindly. She spoke of regret, of complicated feelings, of not wanting to hurt anyone. Clara listened. "You deserve peace," Madeline said. "Dragging this out will only hurt you more." The message was clear, even if it was wrapped in empathy. Then came the practical blows. Clara's contract renewal was delayed without explanation. Her landlord reminded her the lease was ending soon. The assisted living facility informed her of a rate increase. One problem at a time. Nothing dramatic enough to fight, but together they closed in like walls. When Clara mentioned these stresses to Ethan's lawyer, he nodded sympathetically and suggested moving quickly before circumstances worsened. The pressure worked exactly as intended. By the time they walked into the courthouse for the preliminary hearing, Clara stood alone. No family, no visible allies. Her lawyer was a court-appointed placeholder who barely met her eyes. Across the room, the Crowells looked composed, confident, almost bored. They whispered, smiled, exchanged knowing glances. This was not their first legal victory. To them, Clara was already defeated. What none of them realized was that Clara had survived worse than humiliation, worse than loss. She had learned how to endure quietly, how to wait, how to let people underestimate her. And in a room full of people certain of the ending, that would soon become their most expensive mistake. By the second hearing, the courtroom no longer felt neutral. It felt staged. Clara sensed it the moment she stepped inside. The seating arrangement had shifted subtly, but meaningfully. The Crowells occupied the front row now, close enough to the counsel table to whisper without turning their heads. Their lawyer greeted the clerk by name, exchanged pleasantries, joked softly. Familiarity wrapped around them like armor. Clara sat alone again, one row back, her coat folded carefully over her knees. She had chosen it, deliberately plain, dark, professional, not defiant, not pitiful, just presentable enough to avoid comment. Still, she caught Brooke Crowell's eyes flick briefly to her shoes, then away with a smirk. The hearing began with procedural updates. Dates, documents, polite formalities. Then the Crowells' lawyer requested permission to address emerging concerns regarding Miss Whitman's stability. Clara felt her spine stiffen. The words were smooth, practiced, delivered with concern rather than accusation. He spoke about Clara's inconsistent employment history, about her emotional strain caring for an ailing parent, about the risks of prolonging litigation when one party was clearly struggling to maintain basic footing, end quote. It was a performance designed to sound compassionate while quietly dismantling her credibility. The judge listened, expression unreadable. When Clara's lawyer stood to respond, his argument was thin. He emphasized Clara's cooperation, her willingness to settle, her desire to move forward peacefully. He did not challenge the narrative. He did not counter the implications. He sat down too quickly. Clara realized, with a cold clarity, that no one in this room expected her to fight. Patricia Crowell leaned toward Ethan and whispered something. Ethan nodded once, barely perceptible, but satisfied. Madeline Ross sat 2 rows behind them, hands folded, eyes downcast. She looked almost remorseful. Almost. Then came the request that shifted everything. The Crowells' lawyer asked the court to expedite the proceedings due to financial imbalance, suggesting that extended litigation would only deepen Clara's hardship. He framed it as kindness, as mercy. If Miss Whitman agrees, he concluded, we believe this matter can be resolved swiftly and without unnecessary distress. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Clara. She felt the weight of it, the unspoken expectation, the assumption that she would accept what was offered because she had no better option. She thought of her mother, confused and frightened during their last visit, of the lease notice folded in her bag, of the folder Patricia had slid across the table weeks earlier. This was the moment they had engineered. Clara stood. Her heart beat steadily, not fast, not panicked. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize for taking up space. I understand the court's concern, she said evenly, and I appreciate the intention to minimize distress. Patricia smiled, already victorious. But I won't agree to expedited terms, Clara continued. Not today. The shift was immediate. Brooke's smirk vanished. Ethan frowned, just slightly. The lawyer's expression tightened, recalibrating. Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply stated her position, calmly, clearly, and sat back down. The judge nodded once. Noted. It was a small moment, barely visible to anyone not watching closely. But Clara felt it, the crack in the momentum, the brief interruption of their certainty. For the first time, the Crowells looked unsettled. They had expected fear. They had expected compliance. They had not expected resistance. And as the hearing adjourned, Clara sensed something else beneath the tension. Impatience. They wanted this over quickly, which meant they had something to lose if it wasn't. After the hearing, the Crowells moved faster. Clara felt it before she saw it. The sudden urgency, the polite messages that arrived too quickly to be coincidence. The tone shifted from confidence to insistence, as if time itself had become their enemy. That afternoon, Ethan texted her for the first time in weeks. We should talk. For everyone's sake. They met in a glass-walled conference room at his lawyer's office, high above the street, where the city looked distant and unreal. Ethan arrived early, already seated, jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled just enough to appear reasonable. There was coffee waiting for her. He remembered how she took it. No sugar, oat milk. It almost worked. You didn't have to push back in court, he said gently. It made things harder than they need to be. Clara sat across from him, hands folded, listening. My parents are worried, he continued. They think you're underestimating how bad this could get for you. There it was. Concern disguised as warning. Ethan slid a document toward her. Another agreement. Revised, cleaner, still devastating. No alimony, he said, as if explaining a weather forecast. But we'll extend the move-out date, help you transition. Help. The word landed like an insult. I just want closure, Ethan added. Dragging this out will only hurt you. Clara studied his face. The man she had once loved sat inches away, speaking carefully chosen words, avoiding her eyes. She realized something then, sharp and clarifying. He was afraid. Not of losing money, not of public embarrassment, afraid that she might slow things down long enough for something else to surface. I'll review it, Clara said quietly. That evening, Madeline Ross called. I heard court didn't go as planned, Madeline said softly. I hope you're okay. They met again, this time at a small restaurant near the river. Madeline spoke carefully, always framing herself as neutral, as caught in the middle. You should think about your future, she said. Ethan's family doesn't play fair. Clara almost laughed. What do you want, Madeline? She asked. Madeline hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smiled sadly. I don't want anyone destroyed. It was the first honest thing she'd said. The next blow came quietly. Clara's bank flagged unusual activity. A joint account Ethan had once managed showed discrepancies, fees, withdrawals she hadn't authorized. When she asked his lawyer, he shrugged. Standard adjustments, he said, nothing illegal. But it was enough to tighten the noose. At home, Clara opened the folder Patricia had given her weeks ago and compared it to the new document Ethan had slid across the table. She noticed something most people would miss. A clause buried deep, referencing responsibility for pre-separation financial irregularities. They weren't just trying to leave her with nothing. They were positioning her to carry the blame. For the first time in weeks, Clara didn't feel tired. She felt alert. She made one phone call that night. Not to family, not to friends, to a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Samuel, she said when the line connected. I need you to look at something. There was a pause on the other end. Are you ready for that? He asked. Clara looked at the documents spread across her table, at the careful trap the Crowells believed she was walking into. Yes, she said. I think it's time. She didn't know yet how much would unravel once the thread was pulled. Only that the Crowells had mistaken her silence for weakness, and the next move would no longer be theirs. Samuel Reed didn't ask Clara to explain everything. That alone told her she had made the right call. They met in his office just after sunset, the kind of modest law firm most people overlooked. No glass towers, no name etched into marble, just a quiet building tucked between a medical supply company and a closed bookstore. The waiting room smelled faintly of old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Samuel looked exactly as she remembered him, from years ago, older, leaner, sharper around the eyes, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Clara laid the documents out on the table. The original settlement, the revised agreement, the financial statements she had printed from her bank. Samuel took his time. He didn't rush. He read every line as if it mattered. They're not just divorcing you, he said finally. They're insulating themselves. Clara nodded. That's what I thought. He pointed to the buried clause she had flagged. This shifts potential liability. If there's scrutiny later, you become the convenient explanation. For what? She asked. Samuel leaned back. That depends on what they're hiding. The words settled heavy in the room. Samuel didn't promise miracles. He didn't say everything would be fine. What he did say was worse and better at the same time. If we slow this down, he said, they'll push harder, which means mistakes. Clara exhaled slowly. I don't have much left to lose. That's not true, Samuel replied. But they think it is. That's an advantage. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Ethan's lawyer called twice, leaving messages about urgency and efficiency. Patricia sent a carefully worded email about how stress could affect fragile people. Brooke posted a vague quote online about accountability and consequences, tagging no one but meaning everything. Madeline stopped calling. That worried Clara more than the rest. The night before the final hearing, Clara sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by boxes she hadn't finished packing. Her mother's photograph rested on the kitchen counter, next to a stack of medical bills she hadn't opened yet. Outside, traffic moved steadily, indifferent to her unraveling life. She made one more call. Noah Whitfield answered on the second ring. "I didn't expect to hear from you," he said gently. "I didn't know who else to call," Clara admitted. Noah didn't ask for details. He never did. He just listened as she spoke about courtrooms, contracts, and the strange exhaustion that came from being underestimated for too long. "You don't have to go through tomorrow alone," he said. "I know," Clara replied, "but I think I have to stand there by myself. It's a hot of now." There was a pause. "I'll be nearby," he said, "just in case." That night, Clara barely slept. Her mind replayed every choice she had made, every moment she had stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time she had believed dignity was something you preserved by surrendering ground. By morning, the fear had settled into something colder and steadier. Resolve? At the courthouse, the Crowells arrived together, dressed for closure. Patricia's pearls caught the light. Ethan looked calm, almost relieved. Their lawyer carried a thin briefcase, confident this would end today. Clara walked in beside Samuel Reed. No one recognized him, no one reacted. That was fine. As they took their seats, Clara noticed something small but telling. Ethan kept glancing at the clock. Patricia whispered sharply when he did. Brooke scrolled through her phone, restless. They weren't relaxed. They were waiting. What they didn't know was that the trap they had set required one final thing to work. Speed. And for the first time since this began, Clara was no longer in a hurry. The final hearing began like a formality. That was how the Crowells wanted it to feel: routine, efficient, inevitable. The courtroom filled quickly, not with spectators, but with quiet confidence. Paper shuffled. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Everyone took their places, as if following a script rehearsed long before Clara ever walked into Ethan's life. Judge Eleanor Briggs entered without ceremony and took her seat. She glanced at the docket, then at the parties before her. Her eyes lingered for half a second on Clara, then moved on. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. The Crowell's lawyer stood first. He spoke of resolution, of fairness, of compassion for a difficult emotional situation. His voice was smooth, calm, reassuring, designed to sound reasonable to the very end. He summarized the revised settlement as if it were generous, even protective. "Given Miss Whitman's circumstances," he said, "this agreement allows her to move forward without prolonged strain." Patricia Crowell nodded subtly. Ethan stared at the table, the picture of restraint. Brooke crossed her legs and smiled faintly. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to Samuel Reed. "Mr. Reed?" Samuel stood. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. "We object to expedited closure," he said, "and we request clarification on several financial entries submitted by the petitioner." The word clarification landed harder than any accusation. The Crowell's lawyer stiffened. "Your Honor, these matters have already been addressed." "Have they?" Samuel asked, polite but firm, "because the documentation suggests inconsistencies that directly affect liability." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Inconsistencies," she repeated. Samuel referenced account transfers, timing discrepancies, and responsibility clauses. He didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. He planted questions in the room and let them breathe. Ethan finally looked up. "This is unnecessary," he said, unable to keep the irritation from his voice. "We're trying to move on." Judge Briggs raised a hand. "Mr. Crowell, you'll speak when addressed." Silence snapped back into place. Then something unexpected happened. Madeline Ross stood. The movement was small, but it cut through the room like a blade. Heads turned. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to stop her. "Your Honor," Madeline said carefully, "may I speak?" The Crowell's lawyer spun toward her. "Miss Ross, you're not a party to this." Judge Briggs studied Madeline for a long moment. "What is your relation to the case?" Madeline swallowed. "I was involved with Mr. Crowell during the separation." End quote. The air shifted. Patricia's face drained of color. Brooke's smile vanished. Ethan's jaw tightened, just a fraction too late. Madeline continued, voice trembling but controlled. "I was advised not to interfere, but I believe the court should be aware that certain financial representations may be incomplete." The Crowell's lawyer objected immediately. The judge overruled him. "You may submit a statement," Judge Briggs said. Briefly, Madeline glanced at Ethan once. There was no apology in her eyes, only resolve. "I was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement," she said, "and I declined. After that, I was encouraged to stay silent about what I saw." "And what did you see?" the judge asked. Madeline hesitated, then answered, "Transfers. Accounts moved before the separation date. Discussions about ensuring responsibility didn't fall on the Kroll family." A murmur rippled through the room. Samuel didn't smile. Clara didn't move. She sat perfectly still, heart pounding, as the narrative began to slip out of the Kroll's control. Judge Briggs made a note. "This court will not finalize a settlement under these conditions," she said evenly. "We will reconvene after further review." The gavel struck. The sound echoed longer than it should have. As people stood, whispers erupted. Ethan turned sharply toward Madeline, fury breaking through his composure. Patricia grabbed her purse with shaking hands. Brooke stared at Clara like she was seeing her for the first time. Clara rose slowly, meeting none of their eyes. For the first time, the ending was no longer certain, and the Krolls knew it. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a theater after a show no one expected to be interrupted. Clara remained seated long after the Krolls stormed out. Her legs felt weak, not from fear, but from the strange whiplash of momentum suddenly changing direction. For weeks, everything had been pushing her toward an ending she hadn't chosen. Now the ending had been postponed, and no one knew what came next. Samuel gathered his papers quietly. "This is where things get dangerous," he said under his breath. "For them." Clara nodded. She understood. Pressure didn't break people immediately, it made them reckless. Over the next 2 days, silence fell hard. No calls from Ethan, no messages from Patricia, no smug posts from Brooke. The absence itself felt unnatural, like the moment before a storm breaks. Clara spent those days shuttling between her apartment and her mother's facility, trying to maintain routine while the ground shifted beneath her. On the third morning, Samuel called. "We've been ordered back into court," he said. "Same judge." Clara closed her eyes. "Soon?" "Tomorrow." The courtroom felt different this time. Not hostile, not staged. Watchful. Judge Eleanor Briggs entered with a heavier file in front of her. She didn't look at the Krolls right away. Her gaze went first to Clara, then to Samuel, then finally to Ethan and his family. "We will proceed with clarifications," she said. "Not conclusions." The Crowell's lawyer stood, visibly tense. He spoke faster than before, emphasizing cooperation, misunderstanding, and the need to move forward. He framed Madeline's statement as emotional, unreliable, irrelevant. Judge Briggs listened without interruption. Then she turned her attention to Clara. "Miss Whitman," she said, her tone even, almost conversational. "I have a question before we continue." The room stilled. "Yes, Your Honor," Clara replied. Judge Briggs adjusted her glasses and glanced down at a document Clara hadn't seen before. "Have you ever been under legal guardianship or private trust oversight during your adulthood?" The question landed oddly. Not accusatory, not hostile, just precise. Clara felt Samuel's attention sharpen beside her. "Yes," Clara answered after a brief pause. "I was." A flicker crossed the judge's face. "Recognition? Maybe. Or confirmation." "Under whose authority?" Judge Briggs asked. The Crowells leaned forward. Clara's throat tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Under the supervision of Jonathan Hale." The effect was immediate and electric. Patricia Crowell's breath caught audibly. Brooke stiffened, eyes wide. Even the lawyer froze mid-note. Ethan looked up sharply. "Who?" he demanded before he could stop himself. Judge Briggs raised a hand. "Mr. Crowell, you will remain silent." She looked back at Clara. "And are you currently affiliated with any trust or legal entity associated with Mr. Hale?" "No," Clara said. "I formally declined that affiliation years ago." The judge nodded slowly, as if fitting pieces together that only she could see. "For the record," Judge Briggs said, addressing the room, "Jonathan Hale is the founder of Hale Judicial Trust, a private organization that has funded federal clerkships, judicial training programs, and legal ethics initiatives for over 3 decades. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Samuel spoke then, carefully. "Your Honor, Miss Whitman's prior status is not a claim of authority or influence. It is relevant only insofar as it explains why certain financial structures exist outside the scope of this divorce." Judge Briggs studied Clara again. You declined protection, she said quietly. Why? Clara didn't look at the Crowells. She didn't look at Ethan. She looked directly at the judge. Because I wanted a normal life, she said. And because I believed the people I loved didn't need leverage to treat me fairly. Silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. Judge Briggs closed the file. This court will take a recess, she said. When we return, we will reassess this case with full context. The gavel struck. This time, it didn't signal delay. It signaled exposure. As the courtroom emptied, Clara finally felt it, the shift from survival to consequence. Whatever the Crowells had planned, it had never accounted for this question. And nothing after this would unfold quietly again. The recess lasted 43 minutes. Clara knew, because she counted every one of them. She sat on the same bench in the hallway, hands folded, spine straight, breathing slow. Across the space, the Crowells gathered tightly around their lawyer like a defensive wall. Voices stayed low, sharp, urgent. Patricia paced in short, angry steps. Brooke kept refreshing her phone, color draining from her face with every notification. Ethan stood apart, jaw clenched, staring at the floor as if it might open and swallow him whole. No one looked at Clara. That was new. When the bailiff called them back inside, the courtroom felt smaller. The air was heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the name Jonathan Hale and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. Judge Eleanor Briggs returned with the same file, but her posture had changed. Less patient, more precise. We will resume, she said. This court has reviewed supplemental records. The Crowells' lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, we respectfully request that any reference to external entities be deemed irrelevant to the dissolution. Judge Briggs cut him off with a raised hand. Denied. The word echoed louder than it should have. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Crowell, you signed multiple affidavits asserting full financial disclosure prior to separation. Do you stand by that statement? Ethan hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Enough. Yes, he said, I do. Azar. Judge Briggs nodded once, then looked at Samuel. Mr. Reed. Samuel rose, calm as ever. Your Honor, we submit that the affidavits omit the existence of a holding structure designed to reroute exposure away from the Crowell family. The Crowells' lawyer objected loudly. Judge Briggs overruled him just as quickly. Samuel continued. This structure predates the separation by weeks, not years. And its language mirrors templates associated with private trusts overseen by Hale Judicial Trust. Ein Instinct. The room reacted instantly. Patricia's composure shattered. This is absurd, she snapped. We have no connection to that man. Judge Briggs looked directly at her. Mrs. Crowell, sit down. Patricia froze, then obeyed. The judge turned back to Clara. Miss Whitman, she said, you declined affiliation with Mr. Hale. You did not decline legal literacy, correct? Yes, Clara answered quietly. Did you recognize the structure when you saw it? Clara took a breath. I recognized the intent. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Briggs leaned back slightly, studying Ethan as if seeing him clearly for the first time. This court finds reason to believe that the proposed settlement was not merely unfavorable, but strategically misleading. Ethan's face flushed. That's not fair. Enough, the judge said sharply. You will not speak out of turn again. She made a note, then addressed the room. This court will not finalize any agreement today. Furthermore, I am referring these documents for independent review. The implication hung in the air. Not just delay. Scrutiny. The Crowell's lawyer leaned in close to Ethan, whispering urgently. Brooke's hands trembled as she gripped her phone. Patricia stared straight ahead, lips pressed thin, fury barely contained. Madeline Ross wasn't there this time. Her statement had already done its damage. As the hearing concluded, Judge Briggs added one final sentence, almost casually. And for the record, she said, this court does not look favorably upon parties who mistake silence for ignorance. The gavel struck. This time, no one moved right away. In the hallway, the Crowells fell apart in fragments. Patricia demanded answers. Brooke argued with the lawyer. Ethan stood frozen, staring at Clara as she gathered her things. For the first time since this began, he looked afraid of her. Not because she had power, but because he realized how close he had come to destroying himself, trying to control someone who never needed him to survive. Clara walked past them without a word. She didn't feel victorious. She felt something better. certain. The kind of certainty that comes when the truth is no longer yours to defend and consequences have begun defending themselves. After the 9th day in court, Clara Whitman finally slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without the sharp edge of fear pressing against her ribs. Morning came quietly. No urgent calls, no legal notices slipped under her door. For the first time in weeks, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. That changed by noon. Samuel Reed called her just after she returned from visiting her mother. His voice was calm, but there was something new underneath it, momentum. "The referral is official," he said. "Independent financial review, full scope." Clara closed her eyes. She had expected it. Still, hearing the words made everything real. "What does that mean for them?" she asked. "It means timelines matter," Samuel replied. "It means statements get examined. And it means anyone who signed what they shouldn't have signed is now very nervous." As if on cue, Ethan texted her an hour later. "We need to talk, please." She didn't respond. By evening, the cracks widened. Brooke Crowell's real estate firm quietly removed her profile from their website. A post she'd shared earlier that week vanished without explanation. Patricia's charity committee postponed its annual fundraiser, pending review. Small things, invisible to most people, but Clara noticed patterns. She always had. The Crowells were being distanced. That night, Noah Whitfield stopped by with takeout and no questions. He didn't ask about court or documents. He asked about Clara's mother, about her work, about the restoration project she'd once loved but never finished. "You should go back to that," he said gently. "The one with the old library ceiling." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe." He looked at her carefully. "You don't have to rebuild everything alone anymore." The words settled in her chest, unexpected and warm. The next day, Ethan showed up unannounced. He stood outside her building, hands in his pockets, posture unfamiliar, smaller, less certain. When she didn't answer his calls, he waited. "I'm not here to fight," he said when she finally opened the door. "I just want to understand." Clara studied him quietly. The man who once believed he owned the narrative now looked like someone scrambling to rewrite it. "You already understand," she said. "You just don't like what it means." He flinched. "My parents are scared." "That's not my responsibility," Clara replied evenly. Ethan exhaled sharply. "They say this could get ugly." Clara held his gaze. "It already was. It's a saz." For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders dropped. "I never thought you had this," he admitted. You thought silence meant nothing," Clara said. "You were wrong." He left without another word. 2 days later, the notice arrived. A formal request for testimony. Not from Clara, but from Leonard Crowell. The independent review had found discrepancies large enough to warrant personal explanation. Samuel didn't celebrate. He warned her instead. "This is the phase where people try to trade," he said. "Apologies. Deals. Quiet settlements." "Will it work?" Clara asked. Samuel paused. "Not this time." Because the truth no longer belonged to her. It belonged to process, to record, to consequence. That evening, Clara sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand as memories flickered in and out of focus. Her mother smiled, confused but content. "You look lighter," she said suddenly. Clara swallowed. "I feel lighter." On her way home, Clara checked her phone. A message from Samuel waited. "Court reconvenes next week. Final determinations." She looked up at the city skyline, breathing in the cool air. For the first time since this began, Clara wasn't bracing for impact. She was watching it arrive. And she knew without doubt that whatever came next, she would no longer be the one paying for other people's sins. The courtroom was full again, but the energy had changed. This time, people weren't whispering with confidence, they were whispering with curiosity. Clara noticed it the moment she walked in. A few heads turned, a few conversations stopped mid-sentence. Her name no longer floated through the room as an afterthought. It carried weight now, even if most people didn't fully understand why. Samuel Reed took his seat beside her, calm as always. "This is where they try to regain control," he murmured. "Stay exactly as you are." End quote. Deciding to arrest. Across the aisle, the Crowells looked nothing like the family that once owned the room. Patricia sat rigid, pearls absent, her jaw tight. Brooke avoided eye contact with everyone, her phone face down for once. Leonard looked tired, older than Clara remembered, his hands clasped together as if holding something fragile. Ethan sat at the end, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Judge Eleanor Briggs entered with purpose. "This court has received findings from the Independent Financial Review," she said, wasting no time. "We will address them directly." A thick file landed on the desk. The Crowell's lawyer stood, already sweating. He spoke first, attempting damage control. He emphasized complexity, misunderstanding, clerical oversight. He framed the discrepancies as unfortunate but unintentional. Judge Briggs listened, then turned to Leonard Crowell. "Mr. Crowell," she said, "you were the signatory on several accounts referenced in this review. Do you deny authorizing these transfers?" Leonard cleared his throat. "I acted on advice," he said, "to protect my family." "Protect them from what?" the judge asked. Leonard hesitated. The pause stretched too long. From the corner of the room, Ethan shifted uneasily. Judge Briggs made a note. "This court finds sufficient cause to separate liability considerations from marital dissolution." End quote. That sentence landed like a quiet explosion. The divorce was no longer the central issue. The consequences were. She turned to Clara. "Miss Whitman," she said, "you were positioned to assume indirect responsibility for financial exposure had this settlement been finalized. Were you aware of that risk?" Clara stood. Her voice was steady. "I became aware once I reviewed the language carefully," she said. "That's why I refused to expedite." The judge nodded. "A prudent decision. If Patricia couldn't hold back anymore." "This is absurd," she snapped. "She's rewriting history." Judge Briggs fixed her with a look that stopped her cold. "Mrs. Crowell, the record speaks for itself." The courtroom went silent. Then Judge Briggs delivered what everyone had been waiting for. "This court formally rejects the proposed settlement in its entirety," she said. "Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order ensuring Miss Whitman bears no liability related to these financial structures." Clara exhaled slowly. "Not relief, release." The judge continued. "Additional matters regarding the Crow family's financial conduct will proceed separately." The gavel struck. This time, the sound didn't echo. It settled. In the hallway, the reactions came fast and fractured. Leonard was pulled aside by his lawyer. Brooke disappeared into a side corridor, already on the phone. Patricia stood frozen, as if refusing to accept the reality forming around her. Ethan approached Clara hesitantly. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said quietly. Clara met his eyes. "It always does when people think they're untouchable." He nodded, defeated. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to," she replied. As he walked away, Clara felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Closure. Later that afternoon, Samuel handed her a single-page document. "Your protections are finalized," he said. "You're free." Free. The word felt strange in her mouth. Outside, the city moved on as it always did. Traffic, noise, life. But for Clara, something fundamental had shifted. The weight she'd carried for years quietly, invisibly, had been lifted by truth, not revenge. She texted Noah on her way home. "It's over." A moment later, his reply came. "Then let's start what comes next." Clara smiled as she stepped into the sunlight. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could finally choose. The protection order changed everything. But not in the way Clara expected. She didn't wake up richer. She didn't suddenly move to a better apartment or replace the worn furniture she had learned to live with. The city outside her window looked the same, busy, indifferent, loud. What changed was how people spoke to her. How they paused before making assumptions. How doors that had never opened before now cracked quietly, cautiously. The first call came from a firm she had once applied to years ago and never heard back from. "We heard about your case," the woman said carefully. "And about your background in restoration consulting. We're expanding a project involving historical court buildings. Would you be open to a conversation?" Clara said yes, surprised by how natural it felt. The second call was from the assisted living facility. A billing adjustment, a revised care plan. Someone had reviewed her mother's situation and flagged it for additional support programs Clara hadn't known existed. No miracles, just fairness. Just process, finally working in her direction. Samuel warned her not to read too much into the timing. "People notice shifts in power," he said. they respond. What Clara noticed was something else. People stopped talking over her. At the next court appearance, this one procedural, quiet, almost anticlimactic, Judge Eleanor Briggs addressed Clara directly. "Miss Whitman," she said, her tone professional but warm, "I want the record to reflect this clearly. You did not win because of who you once knew. You prevailed because you refused to be careless with the truth." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." The words stayed with her long after she left the courthouse. That evening, Noah came over with dinner again. No celebration, no champagne, just food and shared silence that felt easy instead of heavy. They sat on the floor because the table was cluttered with paperwork Clara hadn't sorted yet. "You know," Noah said eventually, "you never once asked for anything through all of this." Clara smiled faintly. "I didn't think I was allowed to." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You are." The truth of it hit her harder than any courtroom victory. Over the following week, the Crowells faded from her life in small, unglamorous ways. No dramatic apologies, no grand confrontations. Ethan sent one final message, short and resigned. "I hope you're okay." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Leonard's testimony was scheduled. Brooke's license review moved forward quietly. Patricia withdrew from public events altogether. Consequences didn't roar. They arrived through envelopes, meetings, and absences that spoke louder than outrage ever could. One afternoon, Clara received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page, typed, unsigned. "You did what I hoped you would do one day. Live without borrowing protection. I'm proud of you." She stared at the words for a long time. Jonathan Hale had not shown up. He had not claimed her publicly or offered reconciliation. He had done something far more respectful. He had let her ending belong to her. That night, Clara walked through the city with Noah beside her, the air cool and clear. They passed places she had once avoided because they reminded her of who she had been when she felt small. She didn't feel small anymore. Not because she had won, but because she had endured, chosen carefully, and stood still long enough for the truth to catch up. As they stopped at a crosswalk, Noah reached for her hand, not urgently, not possessively. Just there. Clara let herself hold on. For the first time in years, she wasn't rebuilding what someone else had broken. She was building something new. Something chosen. Something earned. Clara didn't realize how deeply she had been bracing herself until the tension finally left her body. It happened on an ordinary morning. No court date, no phone vibrating with bad news, just sunlight through the kitchen window and the low hum of the city waking up. She stood there longer than necessary, holding her coffee, waiting for the familiar jolt of anxiety that usually followed quiet. It didn't come. Instead, there was space. The review into the Crowells' finances moved forward without drama, which somehow felt more unsettling than headlines would have been. Leonard Crowell's name appeared briefly in a local business bulletin, attached to the word inquiry. Brooke's license status changed from active to under review. Patricia Crowell stopped attending the social events she once dominated. The absence was loud in the circles that noticed such things. Clara noticed something else. People began treating her differently, not with fear or reverence, but with care. At the firm she'd spoken with earlier, the conversation turned into a formal offer. Not a favor. Not charity. A contract based on her experience, her eye for detail, her ability to restore without erasing history. "You see value where others see inconvenience," the project director said. "That's rare." Clara accepted without hesitation. Her mother's condition stabilized under the revised care plan. The staff seemed more attentive, less rushed. One nurse confided quietly, "Your advocacy made a difference." Clara smiled, though she knew it wasn't advocacy alone. It was timing. It was the world finally paying attention. One afternoon, Samuel Reed asked her to stop by his office. "There's one more thing," he said, handing her a document. The court finalized the separation terms. Clara scanned the page. No hidden clauses, no quiet traps, just clean language and finality. "It's done," Samuel said. She nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "Not everyone survives what you did without becoming bitter." Clara considered that. "I didn't survive it alone," she said. Later that evening, she met Noah at a small restaurant neither of them had been to before. No memories attached, no ghosts. "You're different," Noah said as they waited for their food. Clara laughed softly. I feel like myself again. He reached across the table, not to claim her attention, but to meet it. That's all I hoped for. The next week, Clara ran into Ethan unexpectedly on the street. He looked thinner, less polished. The certainty he used to wear so comfortably was gone. I heard about your new project, he said awkwardly. Congratulations. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Clara replied. They stood there for a moment, two people no longer bound by resentment or obligation. I was wrong about you, Ethan said finally. Clara met his eyes, calm and steady. I know. She didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need one. As she walked away, she understood something clearly for the first time. Justice hadn't arrived with fireworks or public humiliation. It had arrived quietly, persistently, and without asking her to become someone she wasn't. The Crowells hadn't been destroyed. They had been revealed. And that was enough. That night, Clara sat beside her mother, reading aloud from a book her mother no longer remembered owning but still loved hearing. The words flowed easily. The past felt settled. The future felt open. When Noah picked her up later, she stepped outside without checking her phone, without rehearsing explanations, without fear of what might follow. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. And somewhere behind her, the chapter that once defined her finally closed, not because it was erased, but because it had been fully, honestly told. The invitation arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, slipped under Clara's door with the rest of the mail. No logo, no flashy envelope, just thick cream paper and her name written cleanly across the front. Inside was a single-page letter and a formal contract. The project was real federal restoration oversight, long-term, stable, and respected. It wasn't glamorous work, it was careful work, the kind that required patience, discretion, and a deep respect for what came before. Exactly the kind of work Clara had always done without recognition. She read the letter twice before sitting down. This wasn't an offer made out of sympathy or curiosity. It was a result of recommendations, quiet conversations, and people finally listening when her name was mentioned. The world hadn't changed overnight. It had adjusted slowly, deliberately, once the noise was gone. When she told Samuel, he smiled in that restrained way of his. You earned this, he said, no shortcuts. That mattered more to her than the position itself. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm Clara hadn't felt in years. Mornings spent reviewing plans and materials. Afternoons visiting her mother, who seemed calmer lately, as if the steadiness in Clara's life had reached her too. Evenings, walking through the city with no urgency, no legal deadlines hanging over her head. And Noah, he didn't push. He didn't rush her into defining anything. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered details. He listened when she spoke and when she didn't. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Noah spoke carefully. I don't want to replace anything you lost, he said. I just want to be here for what you're building. Thank you, Frosh. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. For so long, love had felt like a negotiation, a trade-off, a role she had to perform correctly to be kept. This felt different, unconditional, in a way she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Across the city, the Crowells continued to fade. Leonard's legal situation progressed quietly, without spectacle. Brooke took a leave of absence she didn't announce publicly. Patricia withdrew from social life altogether, choosing absence over explanation. Ethan transferred departments. His career stalled, but not destroyed. There was no dramatic downfall, just proportion. One afternoon, Clara received another letter, this one handwritten, careful, familiar. Jonathan Hale. He didn't apologize. He didn't justify the past. He acknowledged her choices. You stepped away from protection so you could stand on your own. Most people never learn the difference. I see it now. There was no request for a meeting. No expectation of reconciliation. Just recognition. Clara folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. She didn't need to respond. That evening, she cooked dinner for Noah for the first time. It wasn't perfect. She burned the vegetables slightly. They laughed about it. She felt present in a way she hadn't for years. Later, as they cleaned up together, Noah paused. You know, he said, you didn't just walk away with your dignity. You changed the rules for how people treat you. If you never 7, Clara considered that. No, she said softly. I just stopped accepting less. As she went to bed that night, Clara realized something profound. She hadn't been rewarded with power, wealth, or revenge. She had been rewarded with choice, with work that respected her, with love that didn't demand sacrifice, with peace that didn't feel temporary. And for the first time, she understood that the greatest justice wasn't what the world took from those who wronged her. It was what it finally gave her back. Just when Clara believed the story had finally settled, the past tried once more to reach for her. It came in the form of a voicemail she didn't listen to right away. The number was unfamiliar. The message notification sat quietly on her screen all morning while she reviewed restoration plans and answered emails for her new project. She almost deleted it without thinking. Almost. She listened to it that evening, standing by the kitchen counter while water boiled behind her. "Clara, it's Patricia." The voice was thinner than she remembered, less sharp, still controlled but strained around the edges. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," Patricia continued, "but I need to speak with you, privately, just once." Clara ended the message before it finished. For a moment, she stood there, phone in hand, feeling the old reflex stir the instinct to manage other people's discomfort, to smooth over tension before it turned sharp. The habit had been trained into her over years of silence. She set the phone down instead. An hour later, another message arrived, this time from Ethan. "I know my mother reached out. I didn't ask her to, but things are complicated right now." Clara exhaled slowly. Complicated had always been the Crowell's favorite word, a way to blur responsibility, a way to ask for understanding without offering accountability. She didn't respond. 2 days later, Samuel called with an update. "Leonard's testimony is scheduled sooner than expected," he said. "There's pressure, deals being floated." Clara leaned against the window, watching the city move below. "And they think I can help?" Samuel didn't deny it. "They think you might soften things. Speak on character. Clarify intentions." Clara almost laughed. "They don't understand," she said quietly. "No," Samuel agreed. "They still don't." That night, Noah found her sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. "They reached out," she said before he could ask. He nodded. "Do you want to talk to them?" Clara shook her head. "I don't owe them closure." Noah didn't argue. He sat beside her, close but not crowding. "You know," he said gently, "choosing not to engage is still a choice. And it's a powerful one." The next morning, Clara did something she hadn't done in years. She blocked the numbers. No dramatic message, no final statement, just a quiet boundary placed where chaos used to live. The effect was immediate. No more calls, no more veiled requests. The Crowells were forced to face what was coming without the illusion that Clara would absorb the impact for them. Weeks later, the results unfolded exactly as Samuel predicted. Leonard accepted responsibility in a limited agreement that spared public escalation but ended his influence permanently. Brooke's license was suspended pending further review. Patricia withdrew entirely from public life, choosing silence over scrutiny. Ethan's career plateaued, his name now associated with caution rather than confidence. There was no moment where Clara stood in triumph. There was simply distance. One evening, Clara and Noah walked along the river as the city lights reflected softly on the water. The air was cool, calm. "Do you ever wonder if you should have said something?" Noah asked. Clara thought for a moment. "I said everything that mattered," she replied. She had said it with restraint, with truth, with refusal to be small. As they stopped and leaned against the railing, Clara felt something settle deep inside her, a certainty that no call, no apology, no explanation from the past could improve what she had now. The story wasn't ending with confrontation. It was ending with boundaries. And for the first time, Clara understood that this quiet, self-chosen peace was the most complete form of justice she could have asked for. Clara Whitman's life didn't change all at once. It shifted quietly, the way old buildings settle after careful restoration. No dramatic collapse, no sudden transformation, just strength returning where it had always belonged. Her new project demanded patience. Long hours spent reviewing aging structures, documenting cracks invisible to anyone who didn't know how to look. She liked that. It felt honest. No one rushed her. No one questioned her judgment. For the first time in years, her work wasn't something she had to justify. On her desk sat a simple nameplate. No titles, no legacy attached, just her name. That mattered. Her mother's good days became more frequent. On those days, they walked the garden paths together, slow and steady. Sometimes her mother recognized her, sometimes she didn't. Either way, Clara held her hand and talked about ordinary things: weather, flowers, a neighbor's dog. Stability mattered more than memory now. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench beneath turning leaves, her mother looked at her and said softly, "You look like yourself again." Clara swallowed. "I feel like myself." The words stayed with her. That evening, Noah cooked dinner while Clara reviewed notes at the kitchen table. It was an unspoken arrangement that had settled naturally between them. No declarations, no pressure, just presence. "You know," Noah said, stirring the pot, "you don't brace yourself anymore." En portion, tressen, en portion. 24. Clara looked up. "What do you mean?" "You used to pause before answering simple questions," he said gently. "Like you were preparing for a reaction." She thought about it. He was right. "I don't feel like I have to manage the room anymore," she said. "That's freedom," Noah replied. The divorce decree arrived the following week. Clean, final, no drama. Clara read it once, signed where required, and filed it away. It didn't feel heavy, it felt finished. There was no urge to look back. Ethan didn't reach out again. Patricia's silence remained unbroken. The Crowells faded fully into the background, not as villains, but as people who no longer mattered to her daily life. And that was the real ending. One night, as Clara and Noah walked through the city after dinner, they passed the courthouse without slowing. The building stood tall and unmoved, its steps empty. "I used to feel small there," Clara said quietly. Noah glanced at her. "And now?" "Now it's just a building. Bore is us." They kept walking. Later, as they stood at her door, Noah hesitated. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "But I want you to know I'm here not because you need help, but because I choose to be." Clara met his eyes. "I choose you too." The simplicity of it surprised her. No fear, no calculation, just truth. As she closed the door that night, Clara leaned against it for a moment, breathing deeply. The quiet no longer felt like something to endure. It felt like space she had earned. She thought about everything she hadn't fought for: money, status, recognition, and everything she had gained instead. Respect, autonomy, love that didn't require sacrifice. The world hadn't handed her justice wrapped in spectacle. It had given her something far more lasting. A life where silence was no longer imposed. It was chosen. And for the first time, Clara Whitman didn't feel like she was recovering from something. She felt like she had arrived. Clara didn't notice the exact day the past stopped following her. There was no announcement, no clear line drawn in the calendar. It happened quietly, somewhere between a normal morning and an ordinary evening, when she realized she hadn't thought about the Crowells at all. She noticed it while walking to work. The city was loud, impatient, alive. Construction noise echoed between buildings. A delivery truck honked. Someone argued loudly into a phone. It was the kind of chaos that used to overwhelm her, used to make her feel small and out of place. Now, it barely registered. Her focus was on the building ahead, the one she was responsible for restoring. A courthouse annex built decades earlier, overlooked and poorly maintained, written off as inefficient. Clara saw something else. Potential, history worth preserving. A structure that only needed the right hands and enough time. That recognition felt familiar. Inside, her team waited for her input. They didn't talk over her. They didn't rush her. When she spoke, people listened, took notes, adjusted plans. It wasn't admiration, it was trust. At lunch, she sat alone by choice, not isolation. She enjoyed the quiet, the ability to think without anticipating someone else's reaction. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Noah. "Dinner tonight? No agenda." She smiled. Later, as they walked through a small neighborhood market, Noah reached for her hand naturally, without hesitation. The gesture didn't feel symbolic. It felt normal, safe. "You seem lighter lately," he said. "I think I finally am," Clara replied. She told him about the building, about the way people had dismissed it for years because it wasn't flashy enough. Noah listened, genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer advice unless she asked. That, too, felt new. On the way home, they passed a familiar street corner. Clara slowed instinctively, then stopped herself. "What is it?" Noah asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just an old habit." That night, after Noah left, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a box she hadn't opened in months. Inside were remnants of her old life documents, notes, photographs she had never thrown away because she wasn't ready to decide what they meant. She sorted through them calmly. Wedding photos, court papers, letters she had written and never sent. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel nostalgia. She felt distance. She kept a few things, discarded the rest. Not as an act of erasure, but of completion. Before bed, she checked her email one last time. A short message from Samuel sat unread. "Final confirmations complete. No further action required." That was it. No more loose ends. No more waiting. As she turned off the light, Clara realized something important. She wasn't healing anymore. She was healed. The difference mattered. Healing implied damage still being repaired. What she felt now was stability, a foundation strong enough to build on without constantly checking for cracks. The next morning, she woke before her alarm, stretched, and got out of bed without that familiar knot in her stomach. No rehearsing conversations, no anticipating conflict, just the simple intention of moving forward. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp. The city moved around her, unaware that something had ended. And that was exactly how it should be. Because the truest victory of all wasn't public justice or visible consequence. It was this moment when Clara Whitman no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Not her ex-husband, not his family, not even the past version of herself. She walked forward, unburdened, and for the first time, she didn't glance back, not because she was afraid of what she might see, but because there was nothing left there that belonged to her. Clara thought she was done being surprised. That belief lasted exactly one afternoon. She was reviewing site photos at her desk when the receptionist knocked lightly and said there was someone asking for her by name. No appointment, no explanation. Clara almost declined. Then something in the woman's expression, careful, respectful, made her pause. "I'll come out," Clara said. The man waiting in the lobby stood when he saw her. He was older than she remembered, but unmistakable. Tall, composed, dressed simply, without the markers of status most people in his position carried like armor. Jonathan Hale. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I won't take much of your time," he said quietly, "if you'll allow me a few minutes." Clara studied him. This was the man whose name had shifted a courtroom. The man she had deliberately stepped away from years ago. She felt no rush of emotion, no anger, no longing, just awareness. "5 minutes," she said. They sat across from each other in a small conference room. No lawyers, no documents, just two people who shared history without having lived it together. "I didn't come to explain myself," Jonathan said, "or to reopen anything." Clara nodded. "Good." He smiled faintly at that. "I came to acknowledge something. You chose the harder path. You could have ended this much earlier, much easier." "I know," Clara replied. "You didn't," he continued, "because you wanted your life to be yours. Not protected, not leveraged." She met his gaze. "I wanted it to be honest." Jonathan leaned back slightly. "Most people don't realize what they give up when they choose power too early." Silence settled between them, not awkward, not tense, just real. "I won't offer you anything," he said finally. "No position, no affiliation. That would cheapen what you built." Clara felt a quiet satisfaction at that. "Then we understand each other." He stood, signaling the meeting's end. "I'm glad you're well," he said simply. "So am I," Clara replied. When he left, there was no lingering weight, no feeling of unfinished business. The meeting hadn't changed her direction. It had confirmed it. That evening, Clara met Noah for dinner. She told him about the visit without drama, without emphasis. He listened, then nodded. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Grounded," she said after a moment. "Like I closed a door I didn't even realize was still open." Noah smiled. "That's a good feeling." Later, as they walked home, Clara noticed something she hadn't expected. She felt no urge to tell anyone else. Not friends, not colleagues, not even Samuel. The moment wasn't meant to be witnessed. It was meant to be absorbed. In the weeks that followed, life continued its steady rhythm. Work progressed. Her mother had more good days than bad. Noah became less of a presence she noticed, and more of a constant she relied on without thinking. One evening, As they sat quietly reading in the same room, Clara looked up and realized she felt completely unguarded. No performance. No vigilance. No anticipation of loss. She understood then that closure didn't always arrive with final words or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived as confirmation that you had already become who you needed to be. Clara Whitman had not been rescued. She had not been elevated. She had not been claimed. She had been recognized. And that recognition changed nothing about her path because it no longer needed to. As she turned off the light that night, Clara felt the calm certainty of a woman who knew this chapter wasn't ending. It was complete. And everything ahead of her, every quiet joy, every chosen love, every ordinary day belonged fully, unquestionably, to her. Clara learned about the final outcomes the same way she learned most things now, indirectly, without drama, without being pulled into the center of it. Samuel mentioned it at the end of a routine call. "Everything related to the Crowell matter has concluded," he said. "No appeals, no extensions. If it strives the dollar—" Clara paused, phone pressed to her ear, surprised by how little her body reacted. No rush of relief, no surge of emotion. "Okay," she said simply. Leonard Crowell accepted a settlement that stripped him of influence and required permanent withdrawal from several boards he once dominated. It wasn't public humiliation. It was worse for someone like him, irrelevance. Brooks' license review concluded with suspension and mandatory ethics retraining. Her carefully curated image faded quietly from professional circles that moved on without her. Patricia never re-emerged. No statements, no explanations, just absence. Ethan transferred again. This time, not by choice. His role became smaller, safer, unremarkable. The kind of position given to people companies didn't trust enough to promote but didn't want the trouble of firing. He became what he had once feared most: replaceable. Clara didn't celebrate any of it. She didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. What she felt was distance, clean, intentional distance that allowed the past to exist without touching her present. One afternoon, she passed a cafe where she and Ethan had once argued quietly, voices low, pretending everything was fine. She noticed the memory surface, then fade just as quickly. It had no pull anymore. That was new. At work, the restoration project entered its final phase. Clara walked through the site with the team, pointing out details that mattered, lines that needed to be preserved, materials that told a story worth keeping. People listened. They trusted her judgment. "You're good at this," one of the junior architects said. "You don't erase the damage. You work with it." Clara smiled. "That's the point." That evening, she and Noah cooked together, music playing softly in the background. There was no discussion of the past, no unpacking of old wounds, just shared space and easy conversation. Later, as they sat on the couch, Noah spoke thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "some people wait their whole lives for the kind of justice you got." Clara shook her head gently. "I didn't get justice," she said. "I got alignment." He considered that. "What's the difference?" "Justice looks backward," she replied. "Alignment lets you move forward without carrying what doesn't belong to you." Noah reached for her hand. He didn't argue. That night, Clara sorted through one last box she'd kept tucked away, papers she no longer needed, mementos she'd held onto out of habit. She discarded most of it without ceremony. She kept one thing, a notebook filled with restoration sketches from years ago. Not because of what it represented then, because of what it still represented now. As she placed it back on the shelf, Clara understood something clearly. The story hadn't ended with the Crowells facing consequences. It had ended with her no longer being shaped by them. Their downfall wasn't the point. Her freedom was. She turned off the light and went to bed, not thinking about what had been taken from anyone else, but about what she had built, quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. The circle had closed. Not with noise, but with peace. The morning Clara realized the story was truly over came without ceremony. No letters. No phone calls. No reminders. Just light spilling across the floor as she opened the windows and let fresh air move through the apartment she now fully considered home. Not a temporary place. Not a waiting room. Home. She moved slowly, intentionally. Coffee brewed. Music played softly. Outside, the city followed its familiar rhythm, unaware that for one woman, a long chapter had closed completely. Clara thought about how the story had begun standing alone in a courtroom, underestimated, spoken over, reduced to what others believed she lacked. She remembered the weight of silence pressed onto her shoulders, the way dignity had felt like something she had to defend instead of something she owned. That weight was gone. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Noah. "I'll pick you up after work. I want to show you something." She smiled, not curious with anxiety, but with ease. At work, the restoration project reached its final inspection. Clara walked the length of the building slowly, fingers brushing the cool stone, eyes tracing lines she had insisted be preserved. The structure stood stronger now, not flawless, but honest. History intact. Damage acknowledged, not hidden. The inspector nodded. "You did good work here." Clara didn't correct him. She accepted the words. In the afternoon, she visited her mother. They sat together near the window, sunlight warming their hands. Her mother's memory drifted in and out, but her calm remained. "You're safe," her mother said suddenly, as if stating a fact she could feel even if she couldn't explain. Clara swallowed and squeezed her hand. "I am." That evening, Noah drove them out of the city, past noise and crowds, toward a quiet overlook above the river. The sky stretched wide, painted in soft colors as the sun began to set. "I didn't bring you here to ask anything," Noah said. "I just wanted to share the view." They stood side by side, watching light fade, the city glowing softly below them. After a moment, Clara spoke. "I used to think winning meant proving something," she said. "To them, to myself." Noah waited. "Now I think winning is waking up without fear," she continued. "Choosing who stands next to you, and not shrinking anymore." He turned to her then. "You never were small." She met his gaze. "I know. That was the difference." Later, back home, Clara placed one last item into a box, a copy of the final court order, not as evidence, not as armor, but as closure. She sealed the box and slid it onto a high shelf. She didn't need to revisit it. As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Clara paused, looking around the room. Everything in it was chosen. Earned. Real. No more defending her worth. No more explaining her silence. No more surviving someone else's power. The story had not ended with applause or spectacle. It ended with balance. With accountability finding its place. With dignity returning where it belonged. With love arriving gently, without demand. Clara lay down, calm settling over her like a final answer. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with wealth. Some end with recognition. Hers ended with peace. And that was the ending she had always deserved. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us at this moment, then maybe, just maybe, something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet way. What Clara's story reminds us is not about winning loudly or proving our worth to those who never truly saw us. It's about something deeper and more lasting. The Stoics believed that you have power over your mind, not outside events. And throughout this story, that truth kept revealing itself. Clara didn't heal by controlling others. She healed by reclaiming her inner ground, her choices, her silence, and her dignity. Another Stoic thought says, the best revenge is to be unlike the one who harmed you. And isn't that exactly what happened? Not through anger, but through alignment. Life often tests us in unfair rooms, with people who underestimate our quiet strength. But healing begins the moment we stop shrinking, stop explaining, and stop carrying what was never ours to hold. Peace, as this story shows, is not weakness. It is strength refined. If this message resonated with you, if it felt personal in any way, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your presence here means more than you know, and we're grateful you stayed until the end.